71-year-old Walter Brennan has owned nothing but empty silence for 3 years, ever since his wife Eleanor passed and his son moved the cattle operation north to better pasture. The land is still his, 300 acres of red clay and fading fence, but the work has become a shadow of itself. He mends fences he doesn't need to mend. He fixes the barn door that keeps opening. He waits for reasons to matter. One October morning, a county shelter truck pulls up his long drive with a border collie in the back, a dog so scarred and wary that no one wants her. The shelter worker, a young woman with kind eyes, calls her broken. She bites when startled. She flinches at loud sounds. She'll work maybe, but something in her is cracked. Walter takes her anyway, not for the work, because he recognizes the look of someone who's forgotten their own value. What follows is a story of two broken things, learning to heal not through medicine, but through purpose, loyalty, and the slow discovery that being needed by something real is the same as being healed. The dog will save the farm will save the dog. And Walter will discover that redemption isn't about finding new reasons to live. It's about remembering why the old ones ever mattered. Chapter 1. The Arrival. The shelter truck arrived on a Tuesday, dust rising behind it like a ghost. I was repairing the west fence again when I saw the brake lights. I've learned to recognize that feeling, something shifting in the air, something you didn't ask for coming toward you anyway. The worker was young, couldn't have been more than 30, with a clipboard and tired eyes. She had a dog in the back of the truck, a border collie with a coat like burnt rust and a stare that looked through things instead of at them. "Walter," the young woman said, climbing down, "this is Sage. She came in off a property up near Crossville. The folks who owned her said they couldn't keep her anymore. Medical bills, you know. Said she was a working dog, but—" She trailed off, and that word, "but," held more weight than most sentences do. I walked to the truck. The dog didn't move. Her ears were back, not flat against her head, but set at an angle that suggested she'd learned to listen to everything except kindness. "She'll bite," and the young woman said, not unkindly. "She's been startled a lot, and when she gets startled, she reacts, but she can work. She's got the instinct. She just what? Just doesn't trust it anymore, I think." I looked at the dog, and the dog looked through me. There was no hope in that stare, but there was intelligence. She was calculating. She was waiting to know if this was another place where she'd have to defend herself. "I'll take her," I said. The young woman blinked. Just like that? Just like that. Eleanor would have done the same. She had that ability to see something wounded and know that it wasn't broken so much as frightened, that there was a difference, that one could heal, and the other one. Well, the other one was more honest in a way, more true. I got Sage into my truck, and she moved like she was made of caution. She sat in the passenger seat, didn't jump, didn't panic, just sat and stared out at the road like she was watching for things to go wrong. We drove home in silence. The radio didn't work anymore. Eleanor used to sing along to it, old country songs with clear, familiar melodies. She had a voice like honey over gravel, rough but sweet. The farm was waiting. It always is. The house stood at the end of the drive, white paint peeling in long, thin strips. The barn hunched behind it, red boards weathered to a dull rust that matched Sage's coat. The pastures rolled out toward the tree line, and the fence I'd been working on all morning stretched between here and there like a message half-spoken. I parked near the barn. Sage didn't move until I opened the door. Then she followed, step by careful step, her nose down, reading the scent of this place like it was a book written in a language only dogs understood. "This is home," I told her, though I wasn't sure who I was telling. "It's quiet here, the work is honest, and nobody's going to hurt you if you don't give them reason to." The dog looked at me, actually looked with her eyes forward and her ears up, and I saw something in that look. Not recognition, not yet, but a possibility of it, thin and fragile as morning light. That night, I left the barn door open. Sage went in without my asking and didn't come back out until dawn. At the end of chapter 1, I found myself wondering if maybe Eleanor had sent her. I don't believe in signs usually, but standing in that barn at 5 a.m., watching a scarred dog breathe steady, I allowed myself to believe in at least this one. Chapter 2. The first days, the first week with Sage, was like learning a new language where silence meant different things depending on the time of day. She ate when I fed her, standing over her bowl with her legs tensed, eating fast, like the food might disappear. I started leaving extra kibble in the barn, and by day 3, she was eating from it instead of guarding the main meals. Small things. Shifts in trust measured in inches. I never grabbed at her, I never raised my voice. I just worked the land like I always had, and I let her watch me do it. I mended fences. I cleared brush from the north pasture. I fixed the barn roof where rain had been seeping through the west corner. And Sage followed, at a distance at first, then closer. On the third morning, I was repairing the gate that hangs between the lower pasture and the upper field. The wood was rotted through on the left hinge, and I had to take it apart carefully, bolt by bolt. The metal was cold under my fingers. My hands aren't what they were. 71 years of work has made them into something like gnarled oak, useful but stiff. Sage came and stood about 10 feet away, watching, just watching, not helping, not working. Just observing the way I moved, the way I held the tools, the way I swore quietly when a bolt stuck. "You don't have to help yet," I told her. "Just learn. There's a difference." By the end of the day, I'd replaced all 4 hinges, reset the gate so it swung true, and Sage had moved from 10 feet away to maybe 3 feet away. She'd sat down once, then stood up again, paced a little circle and sat back down. Uncertainty looks the same in dogs and in people. That afternoon I brought her inside the house for the first time. She wouldn't go past the threshold. I didn't push. I just left the door open and worked in the kitchen, making a pot of broth from chicken bones and vegetables. The smell of it drifted through the open door, warm and patient. After an hour, she came in. Just across the threshold, not far. Her nose was up, reading the air. She saw me at the stove and watched like I might attack with a spoon. When I did nothing but stir, she moved farther into the kitchen and lay down on the linoleum, still watching. "That's good," I said. "You're doing good." Her ears twitched. Whether it was the words or just the sound of my voice, something in the tone reached her. She closed her eyes. Eleanor's chair was still by the window in the living room. I hadn't moved it. Some days I couldn't look at it without feeling the whole house go thin and cold. Other days it was just a chair, and that was worse because it meant I was forgetting, that I was moving on. That grief was becoming convenient. That night Sage slept in the barn. I left the door unlatched so she could come inside if she wanted. By morning she hadn't, but she'd eaten the extra kibble, and she'd dug a small hole near the corner where she could curl up, protected on 2 sides. She was building a nest. Slowly, she was admitting that she might stay. On day 5, I opened the west pasture gate, and Sage watched me do it. The sheep were in there, 40 of them, not the 100 we used to keep. The pasture maintenance had become too much for one man, and a memory of what used to matter. "Go on," I told her. "See what you know." And that's when everything changed. She didn't run. She walked into the pasture like she was waking from sleep. And her whole body straightened. Her ears came up. Her tail, which had been tucked and small, lifted. She moved low and fluid, and the sheep turned to watch her, and I saw it. That thing the shelter worker had said was still there beneath the fear. Instinct. Sage moved in an arc toward the far end of the flock, and the sheep began to bunch, and she circled again. And there was a conversation happening between her and them in a language I'd half forgotten, that old dog language made of silence and movement and understanding. She wasn't herding them rough. She was herding them, sure. She was remembering. I stood at the gate and watched my broken dog work, and something in my chest that had been held tight for 3 years began to release. Not fully, just enough to know it was possible. If you're enjoying this journey so far, tell us in the comments where in the world you're watching from. Chapter 3. Learning to Trust. By week 2, Sage had begun to sleep in the house. She still preferred the barn, still took her meals carefully, still watched the world like it might betray her. But at night, when the wind came down off the ridge and moved through the old house like it was restless, she would climb the stairs and sit outside Eleanor's room. Not inside, but outside, like she was standing guard. I started telling her things about Eleanor, about how she loved this land more than she loved most people, and that was saying something because she was good with people. She just loved the land better, the way morning moved across the fields, the way rain sounded on different roofs, the way work made sense when you were working towards something real. She died in a hospital in town, I told Sage one morning while we were fixing a section of fence near the creek. Not on the land, not here where she wanted to be. She caught pneumonia in January, and by February, she was gone. The doctors said if we'd gotten her there sooner, maybe, if she'd taken better care of herself, maybe. But she was 70, and she'd lived hard, and I think she just decided she was tired. Sage was learning to work with me by then. She would move the sheep from one section to another, and while her way was still rough sometimes, she'd get frustrated and snap. She was learning the difference between discipline and damage. The sheep were learning too. They knew her now. They didn't run when she appeared. The fence was nearly done when I heard the truck. A man I didn't know very well, a developer named Cass Morrison, climbed out with a folder in his hand and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. He wore clothes that looked like they'd come from a catalogue. Designer jeans, a pressed shirt, and his shoes were clean in a way that meant he didn't do his own work. "Walter," he said. "Been a while. Has it?" "About 6 months. Last time I was out here with the county assessor, doing valuations on the north properties. You remember?" I did. I'd seen the truck from a distance and hadn't gone down to meet it. "I wanted to talk to you about something," Morrison said, opening the folder. Inside were papers, photographs, drawings. "You own 300 acres, most of it tillable. You're not using more than 50 of that for sheep. The house is solid. The barn's in decent shape. The creek's good. The road access is excellent." "That's right," I said. "I'm developing a community, about 20 miles north of here, residential but high-end, 40-acre lots, homes that start at $500,000. I'm looking to expand south, and your land—" He held up the photographs. "Your land is perfect. I'm authorized to offer you $3 million for the full 300 acres. The wind moved through the pasture, and the sheep shifted. Sage was watching Morrison with her ears back. Not aggressive, just alert. "No," I said. "You haven't heard the full terms. There's a development timeline, a tax consideration." "No," I said again. "This land isn't for sale." Morrison put the folder down. "Your son doesn't even work this land anymore, I checked. Your livestock is minimal. You're running a shell operation here, Walter. You could retire, actually retire, travel, get out of the weather." "I don't want to travel. You're not getting any younger." "No," I said, "I'm not, and I'll spend whatever time I have left right here." He tried again for another 10 minutes, but I didn't listen much. I watched Sage instead, watched the way she stayed beside me, protective in her way. When he finally drove off, kicking up dust, I felt her lean against my leg. Just for a moment. Just enough to know she understood that something had been threatened, and she was standing with me against it. That night I called my son, David. "You're still there," he said, surprised. "Like I might have died or disappeared since we last spoke. I'm still here. Pop, you can't work that land alone. You're going to hurt yourself. Come up north. We have room. The apartment above the office." I'm not coming north. Why not? Mom's gone. You don't have anything keeping you there. That's exactly why I'm staying, I said. Because she's here. Because when I look at that land, I see her. I see the work we did together. I see the choices we made about what matters. And I'm not selling it so someone else can turn it into another suburb. He was quiet on the other end. Then, okay, Pop, that's okay. I understand. After we hung up, I went to find Sage. She was in Eleanor's room, lying on the bed, something I'd never seen her do before. When I came in, she lifted her head, and I sat down next to her and put my hand on her back. We're going to be all right, I said. You and me. We're going to keep this place, and we're going to do it right. She leaned her head against my chest and stayed there until morning. Chapter 4. The montage of mending. October turned into November, and the work became different. It wasn't work done out of obligation anymore. It was work done with purpose, and Sage was part of that purpose now. She'd become something between a companion and a partner. We started each day the same way. I'd wake, make coffee in Eleanor's old percolator, the one that hissed and popped and filled the kitchen with the smell of something being rebuilt. Sage would come downstairs and wait by the back door, and we'd walk the boundary of the property together, checking fences, watching for signs of damage or intrusion. The first fence we completely replaced was the one on the south pasture. It was old, probably original to when Eleanor's grandfather had bought the place in the 1950s, and the wood had surrendered to rot and rust. I took the posts down one by one, digging out the old concrete, pulling the old wire. Sage watched, learning the rhythm of it. Dig, lift, discard, repeat. By day 3, when I was setting the new posts, I'd bought her a harness. Something to carry tools, something that would let her work beside me instead of behind me. The shelter worker had suggested it months ago, but I hadn't understood until now what it meant. It wasn't about getting work done. It was about telling Sage that she was valuable to this work, that she mattered. She carried supplies in small trips along the fence line, a coil of wire, new fasteners, nothing heavy, but enough to give her the sense of contribution, and I watched her chest fill with something like pride as she did it. We worked through the coldest part of the day, when the sun was low and pale. Her breath came out in clouds. Mine did too. We'd take breaks to drink water from the creek, Sage lapping fast and clean, me cupping my hands and doing the same, the water cold enough to hurt my teeth. The barn roof took 2 weeks. I had to get up there in weather that didn't want me there. Wind that came down off the ridge and rattled the old boards, threatening to knock me sideways. Sage stayed below, watching from the ground, and I realized that her presence was anchoring me. That knowing she was there, loyal and steady, made the risk feel worth taking. I replaced 17 sections of roofing. I sealanged the gaps where wind was getting through. I fixed the east corner where rot had set in around the old weather vane, a rooster that Eleanor had mounted there years ago, hoping it would bring good luck. The vane spun in the wind, and Sage would sometimes track it, her eyes following the metal bird like it might matter. The house needed work, too. The paint had been peeling for years. I scraped it off in long, thin strips, and Sage lay in the yard watching. The work was meditative. Scrape, move the ladder, scrape again. The sun moved across the sky. The wind moved through the bare branches of the trees. Time moved in the way it does when you're not trying to escape it. By mid-November, the first coat of new paint was on, and the house looked like it was waking up. It looked like something worth saving. That's when Sage stopped flinching at loud sounds. Not completely, but enough that when I dropped a tool and it clattered, she didn't immediately retreat. She looked at what had happened. She assessed. She decided it was safe. One afternoon, I was reinforcing the gate hinges when I noticed movement in my peripheral vision. A car coming down the drive. It was my son's truck, and David was behind the wheel. He climbed out and looked around like he was seeing the place for the first time, though he'd grown up here. The paint made a difference. The new fencing made a difference. The sense that things were being maintained, being cared for, made a difference. "Pop," he said, and his voice had changed. It held something like respect, something like apology. "David, the place looks good, really good. There's work to do still. I can see that. But you're doing it. You're actually doing it." He watched as Sage came out of the barn and approached cautiously. "Is that the dog you got from the shelter?" "Sage! Yeah, she's good work. Better every day." David crouched down and Sage came closer, sniffing his outstretched hand. He was gentle with her, the way you learn to be when you've spent years working with animals. "I was wrong," he said, still looking at the dog. "About you needing to come north, I was wrong. This is where you belong." We didn't say much more than that. Men of our kind don't often need to. But he stayed the night, and we sat in the kitchen. And I made the broth the way Eleanor had taught me, and Sage ate from her bowl, and then went upstairs to Eleanor's room and waited for the house to settle into sleep. When David left the next morning, he hugged me. We held on for longer than we usually did, and I think we both understood that something had shifted. That grief had stopped being something I needed to escape and had become something I could build with. If this rural redemption story has you hooked, hit like. It helps us keep these true-to-life tales alive. Chapter 5. The Hidden Discovery. Winter came early that year, and with it came the kind of cold that makes you remember why people are drawn to electricity and central heating. I installed a wood stove in the main room, something Eleanor and I had talked about doing, but never quite got around to, and Sage and I would spend the evenings near it, me reading old journals, her sleeping with her chin resting on my boot. It was in December, while I was looking for some old insurance documents, that I found the metal box. I was in the attic, pushing aside boxes of Eleanor's things that I'd never had the heart to open, when my hand went through a gap in the floorboards, not completely through, but enough to feel something below. Something solid and old. It took me an hour to carefully pry up the boards. They came away with nails that didn't want to leave, and underneath was a metal box, the size of a small suitcase, covered in dust and memory. Inside were letters, dozens of them bound with string, all addressed to Eleanor, all written in the same handwriting I didn't recognize. The dates on them ranged from 1956 to 1967. I opened the first one carefully. The paper was thin and fragile, the kind that yellowed with age. The letter was from someone named James. He wrote about missing her, about a summer they'd spent together before she'd married me, about a choice she'd made to stay in this place instead of going with him to California. The letter was tender and heartbroken, and it ended with, "I understand why you chose the land. I always did. But I will miss you every day." I sat in the attic for a long time holding those letters, trying to make sense of them. There was Eleanor at 24, faced with a choice between adventure and safety, between following her heart to California with someone named James, or staying in this place with a young farmer who had land and lineage, but nothing quite as shiny as possibility. She'd chosen the land. She'd chosen me. I read through the letters carefully, trying to understand who Eleanor had been before she was entirely mine. James was a musician. He'd gone to California to pursue something in film production. He'd written beautiful letters, full of longing and loneliness and the kind of love that makes you ache. But he'd always ended them with acceptance. He'd always said, "I understand. The land is your home and I'm glad you're there. Live well." The last letter was dated 1967, and in it, James wrote that he was getting married, that he'd found someone else, but that he wanted Eleanor to know that the summer they'd had, the choice she'd made, had shaped everything he did after that. It had taught him what it meant to love something, to choose something, over love itself. I came down from the attic with the letters in my hands. And Sage took one look at my face and came to sit against my legs. "Your mother," I said, though I'd never told Sage anything about Eleanor directly before, "was more than just a farmer's wife. She was someone who had choices, and she chose this place. She chose me, and I don't think I ever really understood how much that cost her." That evening I read some of the letters aloud to Sage, sitting by the wood stove. The dog didn't understand the words, but she understood the weight of them. She understood that something had shifted in me, some new layer of gratitude for the woman who'd been my partner for 45 years. I decided to respond to James's last letter, even though I knew he'd never read it. I wrote to him about Eleanor, about how she'd lived this land fully and completely, about how she'd made the choice and never looked back, and about how grateful I was that she'd chosen me. I told him about the farm's history, about the sheep and the cattle and the creek that ran through it. I told him about the work we'd done together and how it had shaped me. I sealed the letter in an envelope and wrote his address on the front, addresses that I'd found in some of Eleanor's old contact books. Then I put it away, not to send, but to have, to hold, to understand that Eleanor had been a complete person, not just half of a couple. That night, I could swear the house felt lighter. Chapter 6. The storm December brought weather that turned the sky the color of cold iron and promised snow that took its time arriving. When it finally came, it came hard. The snow started on a Tuesday morning and didn't stop. By evening, visibility was down to maybe 50 feet. By midnight, the drifts were up against the barn doors. I'd weathered storms before, but there was something different about this one, a kind of weight to it, like the sky was pressing down on the land and intended to keep pressing. I'd brought the sheep closer to the barn, given them extra hay. The house was sealed tight, the wood stove running hot. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was going to give. Sage was restless all through the storm. She paced from window to window, her ears up, her tail not quite relaxed. Animals know things about the weather that people have to learn. They read the pressure and the wind and the electrical charge in the air, and they know what's coming. Around midnight, I heard a sound like something breaking. I went outside with a lantern, and the snow was so thick that the light barely cut through it. But I could see, down by the west fence, the one we'd just replaced, that the new posts were underwater. The creek had risen past its banks, swollen with runoff from the snow and frozen ground that wouldn't absorb anything anymore. I went back inside and called the county emergency number. "How high is the water?" the dispatcher asked. "Maybe 3 feet. It's taking out the fence we just rebuilt." "Is the house in the flood zone?" "No, we're on higher ground." "Then we recommend staying put. The roads are impassable anyway. Don't try to go anywhere." So we waited, Sage and I, through the long night, while the creek became something dangerous and the fence became something we'd have to rebuild again. Around 3 in the morning, the power went out. The wood stove was still working, but the pump for the well wouldn't, which meant I had water in the house, but not much more coming in. I filled every basin and pot I could find, lined them up in the kitchen. By dawn, the storm had started to clear, but the damage was visible. The entire west pasture was underwater. The fence we'd spent 3 weeks rebuilding was half underwater and pulling apart. The gate was gone, swept downstream, timber and wires scattered across the flooded land like the bones of something dead. I stood on the porch and looked at it, and I felt something crack inside me. All that work, all those days of mending, and in one night the creek had erased it. Sage came and stood beside me, and I realized that she was watching the water with an intensity that suggested she was calculating something. She was looking at the fence posts that were still standing, the ones that were holding, the ones that hadn't been pulled away. "We'll rebuild," I heard myself say. "We'll just rebuild." But I wasn't sure I meant it. The next morning, David called to check on us. The roads had cleared enough for him to drive. "We're fine," I said. "I heard about the flooding. How bad?" "Fence is gone. Water's still high. The pasture's a mess." He was quiet for a moment. "Pop, I'm coming down. You don't need to. I'm coming down." He arrived that afternoon with materials, posts, wire, concrete. He'd called some of his workers from up north, and they came too. By evening, we had a crew of 5 men working the creek bed, assessing the damage, starting to rebuild. Sage worked with them, still carrying her load in the harness, still moving with that quiet purpose that she'd learned, and watching her work with these men. My son's employees, people who didn't know her story, I realized something. She'd stopped being broken. Somewhere between arriving here and this moment, something in her had mended. Not because I'd fixed her, but because I'd given her work that mattered. I'd made her part of something real. The crew stayed for 3 days, and by the time they left, the fence was standing again. New posts, new wire. We'd lost some of the materials, but we had the knowledge now. We knew how to rebuild it. We knew that it could break, and we could repair it. That was enough. Chapter 7. The Revelation. Winter settled into the kind of steady cold that meant the land would stay frozen until spring. The snow covered everything, and under it the creek ran quieter, less dangerous. The new fence held. The rebuilt sections held. The old land was starting to show that it wanted to survive. And we were helping it do that. It was in January, during a particularly cold stretch, that the county assessor came back. I saw the truck from a distance and went down to meet him instead of waiting to be approached. Sage came with me, and she walked with the kind of confidence that suggested she knew this land now, knew every fence and pasture and tree, and was ready to defend it. The assessor was a different man this time, and he introduced himself as Tom Hackett. "I'm here about a property claim," he said, holding up a folder. "We've been researching the historical records on your property, and there's something you should know." "What's that?" "Your property line dispute. The line between your land and what was supposed to be the development property." He opened the folder and showed me a series of old maps. Survey records dating back to the 1890s, Eleanor's grandfather's purchase agreement, and underneath it all, a deed that was marked contested. "What does contested mean?" I asked. "It means the land was surveyed twice, and the surveyors disagreed. The discrepancy is about 4 acres. Those 4 acres technically belong to you, according to the older survey, but the developer, Morrison, has been operating under the assumption that they're his." "How is that possible?" "Poor record keeping. A surveyor who died in the 1970s without proper documentation. But we found the original documents in the county archives last month, and I wanted to let you know you own more land than you thought you did." I looked at the maps, trying to understand what this meant. 4 more acres. A clearer property line, something concrete and legal that said this land was mine in a way that couldn't be argued. "What do I need to do?" I asked. "File this claim with the county. It's a relatively simple process. We'll update your records, and the dispute will be resolved." I did the filing the next day, and within 2 weeks it was official. I owned 304 acres instead of 300. It wasn't much difference in reality, but it felt like it mattered. It felt like the land itself was confirming that I belonged here. When Morrison found out, he called. "Your land claim doesn't change the development timeline," he said, his voice sharp. "In fact, it complicates it. We're moving forward with or without those 4 acres. The development's happening." "Not on my property," I said. "It won't be. But you'll see what happens when you're surrounded by development. You'll be isolated, no access. You'll have to sell eventually." I hung up and didn't listen to his voicemails after that. But I did something different. I hired a surveyor to walk the boundary with me, and we marked every inch of it with paint and stakes. I wanted to know exactly where my land ended and the world began. Sage followed us on that walk, and at one point, near the southern boundary, she stopped and wouldn't move forward. I waited for her, and when I looked at what had made her pause, I saw it. a small piece of fence, old and barely visible under leaves and brush. It was marked with Eleanor's initials, E.B. Eleanor Brennan, or Eleanor before, as she was before we married. I realized that Eleanor, when she was younger, had marked the boundary of this land, that this place had mattered to her even before I was part of the story, that she'd come out here with her family as a girl and marked it like a promise. That evening I told Sage about it. She knew, I said. Before I did, she knew this place was home. Sage lay with her head on my knee, and I thought about all the choices we make that seem to narrow the world, but really they're opening it up in ways we can't see until we're living in them. Eleanor chose the land instead of adventure, but the land became the adventure. The work became the story. The place became the reason everything else made sense. Chapter 8. The Proposal. Winter broke slowly, not all at once but in small surrenders. The snow retreated, the creek ran lower, the ground started to remember how to give instead of how to hold hard against the cold. By late February, I was doing calculations on what it would cost to properly restore the entire property. New fencing on the north section. The barn roof needed another coat of sealant. The farmhouse would need new gutters, new windows in the east room where the cold was still getting in. It added up to money I didn't have. That's when I got a call from a woman named Sarah Chen. She said she was a documentary filmmaker, and she'd heard about me from David. "I want to make a film," she said, "about a farmer rebuilding his land with his rescue dog, about grief, redemption, second chances, about a man choosing to stay instead of choosing to leave." "Why?" I asked. "Because it's real, because people need to see that kind of real now. They're drowning in the fake. I'm offering to pay for the privilege of filming your story." "How much?" I asked, suspicious. "Enough to restore your property, roof, fencing, the works, plus a small percentage if it sells well on the streaming platforms." I didn't answer immediately. The offer felt like something I needed to sit with, something that required more than just a yes or no. "Can I think about it?" I said. "Of course, but think about what it means too. Your story isn't just yours. It's a story about why we choose the places we choose, why some of us stay. That matters." I hung up and spent that evening in the barn with Sage, just sitting. The wood stove would be warm upstairs, but I wanted to be out here in this space that we'd learned together. "What do you think?" I asked her, not expecting an answer. "Do we let someone tell our story?" She leaned against my leg, the way she did when she was confident, the way she did when she believed something would turn out all right. I called Sarah back the next morning. "Okay," I said, "but I have conditions." "Okay. What are they?" "The story has to be true. No dramatizing. No making me more noble than I am. And Sage, the dog, she has to be safe. If at any point she's uncomfortable, the filming stops." "Deal," Sarah said. "Those are actually my conditions too." She arrived in March with a small crew, a camera operator, a sound engineer, a producer. They moved through the farm with the kind of respect that meant they understood what they were witnessing, not a performance, a way of life. They filmed me working. They filmed Sage working. They filmed the land in the way morning moved across it and the way evening pulled the light back toward the west. They filmed David helping me repair the south pasture fence. They filmed me sitting in Eleanor's chair telling the story of the letters I'd found, of the choice she'd made. And they filmed Sage sleeping by the wood stove. Sage leading the sheep. Sage understanding in her way that this was her story too, the story of a broken thing becoming whole. The filming took 2 weeks. By the end of it, the farm had its new roof, its new gutters, its fixed windows. The fencing was solid. The place looked like what it was, a home that was being cared for, a place worth staying for. When they left, Sarah hugged me like we were old friends. "Thank you," she said, "for letting us tell it true." Chapter 9. The Return. Spring came the way it always does, all at once, and then gradually, with stops and starts, with freezing nights and thawing days that made the mud deep and the rivers rise again. The grass came back green, the sheep's wool started to think about how to get heavy. Sage started sleeping more outside, in the barn, comfortable with the weather again. One morning in late April, I walked the property with David, who'd come down for the weekend. "The film comes out next month," he said. "Sarah sent me a preview." "How is it?" "It's beautiful, Pop. It's really beautiful. People are going to want to see it." We walked the boundary line, and the paint marks that Eleanor had made all those years ago were still visible under the overgrown brush. I showed them to David. "She was always going to stay," he said. "Yeah, she was. I'm sorry I tried to make you leave. You were worried. That's what sons do." At the southern edge of the property, where the 4 contested acres were, I decided to plant something. Not sheep, not crops, but a memorial garden, lilacs and roses, and the kind of wildflowers that Eleanor had loved. I showed David where I'd planned it. "For Mom?" he asked. "For her, and for Sage, and for me. For anyone who's ever had to choose what matters." That evening we sat on the porch, and I told David about James, about the letters, about the choice Eleanor had made. "Do you think she regretted it?" he asked. "No, I don't think she did. Not for a moment, but I think she might have wondered sometimes about what if. And I'm glad I found those letters because they helped me understand that choosing something means not choosing something else. And that's okay. The something else gets to exist in the letters, in the memory, and the something we chose gets to exist in the life we lived." By mid-May, the lilacs were blooming. The roses had started to climb the trellis I'd built for them. The memorial garden was taking shape, and Sage would often go sit in it, resting in the shade, watching the land move through its seasons. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the County Historical Society. They wanted to include the story of the property dispute in their archives. They wanted to know if I'd donate some of Eleanor's original family documents. I agreed, and that meant going through her things properly, not just finding them by accident. I found more letters. I found journals. I found photographs of Eleanor as a girl, standing in front of this very house, already owning it in her eyes. And in one of the old diaries, dated 1972, I found an entry that said, "James wrote again. He's happy in California. His film was accepted at a festival. I'm so proud of him. My choice was right, but his choices were right too. We're both exactly where we needed to be." The film premiered in June. Sarah brought a copy, and we watched it together in the living room, me and David and Sage, and when it was over, I understood something about telling the truth about yourself. It's harder than any fence work could ever be, but it's necessary. The film found an audience, people who were thinking about leaving and seeing someone choose to stay, people who were broken, seeing a broken dog become whole, people who'd lost someone, seeing someone else choose to honor that loss by choosing the place where the love had happened. By August, Sarah told me the film had been nominated for an award. "But more importantly," she said, "it's changing how people think about what it means to belong somewhere." I thought about all the choices I'd made, to marry Eleanor instead of leave and pursue something else, to stay on this land instead of follow my son north, to take a broken dog instead of wait for a perfect one, to let my story be told instead of keep it to myself. Every choice had been small in the moment. Every choice had looked like it was limiting the possibilities. But standing in September, watching Sage move through the memorial garden, watching the land settle into itself again, I understood that the smallest choices are often the ones that contain the most meaning. Eleanor had come here as a girl and marked the boundary. She'd chosen it as a woman, and now, all these years after her death, the land was still confirming that she'd been right. that staying had been the brave choice, that loyalty to place was its own kind of adventure.